ESPN's Stephen A. Smith was on a tear Friday during his guest appearance on Time with Bill Maher. He made a stunning admission about Kamala Harris's loss. Let's watch.
Yes, I voted for her. A lot of people voted for her. But in the end, we end up feeling like damn fools because we supported it. We fell for the okie doke, as they say. You know she did. If you had a primary, the likelihood is that she would not have been the Democratic nominee. And you can't say that about Trump in this side. You can't.
Stephen A. also skewered Democrats for inadvertently re-electing President Trump and then wondering how that happened. Take a look.
What voter out there can look at the Democratic Party at this moment in time and say, there's a voice for us, somebody that speaks for us, that goes up on Capitol Hill and fights the fights that we want them fighting on our behalf? They didn't do that. And that's why their behinds are home, and that man is back into the White House.
Smith's criticism stunned social media. Conservative account The Calvin Report posted, quote, Stephen A. Smith drops truth bombs on Bill Maher's crowd. The American people chose the felon who kept his promises over party pushing absurdity like men can get pregnant. When leadership abandons common sense, voters will rebel. Actor Kevin Dalton posted, quote, Stephen A. Smith dropping bombs Bill Maher's audience wasn't prepared for. Town Hall reacted this way, quoting ESPN, Stephen A. Smith absolutely obliterated the Dems on Bill Maher's show this week. So this was another viral clip on Bill, the common occurrence on Bill Maher,
certainly.
the kind of centrist perspective backlash to Democratic Party excess. I don't think it's a guarantee that Kamala Harris would not have prevailed in a Democratic primary. I think it could have gone either way. I think she would have been the favorite to win versus any other person.
Yeah.
But that it would have been like 50% her, 50% any one of the other people.
Yeah, I think the reason that even Democrats who are skeptical of Harris are, in retrospect, frustrated about what happened is she had never been that great a candidate in 2020. And yes, she may have won a Democratic primary, but a full-blown Democratic primary, in other words, one in which President Biden had decided to step aside, would have, by its very nature, allowed other challengers to come forth and try to beat her for the nomination. And the argument, I think, is that either she would have emerged as a stronger candidate from that, or the Democratic Party itself would have had a stronger nominee. Now, to some extent, it's kind of crying over spilt milk, in a sense. I don't know if that phrase is used in the United States.
Oh yeah, we say that.
You do?
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Sometimes I inadvertently use Irish or Britishisms that just perplex people. But look, that horse has bolted from the stable. It didn't work out in that way, and Democrats were left with Kamala Harris. I think the original sin there, politically speaking, was Biden hanging on, because once the situation had developed, and then he had that terrible debate, there wasn't going to be an open primary in that point, and kicking Harris away for someone else would have just destroyed. At
that point, they were between a rock and a hard place, to use another idiom, one that probably exists.
Indeed, a universal idiom.
Side of the pond as well. It was just, there was no other choice, really. What do you make of his contention that, I think there's some to this, but I'm interested in it from the Democratic side. Republicans are, this time at least, I would argue a lot of times Republicans do not deliver on their promises to voters. I think the perspective of certainly ardent Trump backers, I don't know if the kind of middle ground lean toward Trump this time, how they feel about things, but I think ardent MAGA people are so far very happy about what they're seeing from Trump, that he has meant it on his immigration rhetoric, that we're deporting, for instance, people to Colombia, and the Colombian president threw a fit about it, threw a little tantrum, and Trump said, absolutely not, you are taking them, and he backpedaled. We just talked about that. It's putting key supporters from all over the ideological spectrum, from your Tulsi Gabbard to RFK Jr., the people who came into the Trump coalition because of their enthusiasm for one of those characters got rewarded. I think the perspective, what I'm saying, of ardent MAGA people is that they're getting what they want from Trump. Stephen A. Smith suggesting that why don't Democrats ever do that? That they are not delivering on what their voters want. Do you think that is true or not?
I think there is merit to it. I do think that Trump has done so far what he said he was going to do. Now that, of course, horrifies people on the Liberal side and enthuses people on the Conservative side. I think there are voters in not really the middle ground, but independent voters who do respect it because they are so accustomed to politicians not saying what they're going to do. And I think that Democrats have suffered from the idea that they move over too much to the centre or try to placate Republicans pointlessly sometimes. They never get the bipartisan agreement that they're seeking and moving to the centre, and it just sort of defangs what they're trying to do, and you end up giving someone like Joe Manchin excessive power. And just there's another point that I do want to make on what Stephen A. said, Robby, which is he made quite a lot of the trans issue, and that was also reflected in one of the tweets. And he made an argument that I think is often problematic, where a party or representatives of a party are asked constantly about an issue. And then when they address that issue, then the question becomes, well, why do you always talk about that topic, right? So Stephen, let's make sure I've got Stephen A's words right. He said about the focus on trans issues, that it was a focus on issues that pertain to less than 1% of the population. The Democratic Party came across as if that was a priority more than the other issues. And my argument is, show me, please, some interview with a Democratic elected politician where they were asked about increasing the minimum wage or expanding healthcare coverage or improving and bolstering Medicare and Medicaid, when they said, well, I'll get to that in a second, but first let me talk about pronouns or let me talk about trans people in sports. That doesn't happen. Yes, I think the Democratic position on trans issues gave ammunition to critics, but there was an enormous swarm of right-wing or Republican backing media that kept that issue in the news and elevated it excessively.
Well, let me push back just slightly on that. Obviously, I agree that the media helps keep those issues front and center. They are interesting to people, clearly, or else the media wouldn't keep talking about them because viewers want to hear about them. And then I think I think Hillary Clinton was most guilty of doing the thing you just described, that where she actually did, of her own volition, want to pivot toward talking, not specifically about trans issues, but about kind of woke or social justice related topics. Like, she had some famous quote about, well, even if we regulate the banks or break up the big banks, that won't solve racism. Like, she wanted to pivot to talking about culture and social issues to cover from her kind of centrist economic views and, frankly, very hawkish or neoconservative foreign policy views. She didn't want to talk about that kind of stuff because maybe she actually knew that with that as front and center was not all that exciting to a lot of her base, to a lot of base Democratic voters, to just a lot of people in the country. But she thought, because she was getting bad advice from the kind of younger, progressive activist people and media people who were most pro her, that leaning into Black Lives Matter and Me Too and women's rights and racial justice was going to be key to her campaign. And that turned out that was, as we continue to harp on, that is actually alienating. That wins with like the college set, the progressive media set, but is extremely alienating to the people who used to be the Democratic base, to working class people.
And to tie all of this together, I think Stephen A. Smith's argument was the Democrats need to fight and need to show that they fight on those economic issues that do have broader appeal.
Yeah. Next up, Vice President J.D. Vance and CBS anchor Margaret Brennan were in a tussle. Let's watch some of that. Stay tuned.